Can you believe the everyday things we once treated as normal in the 1970s would land you in trouble today? These 1970s habits shaped daily life, from how families drove to how neighbors gathered, without a second thought. What does it say about us that freedom then feels reckless now? Riding in the back of pickup trucks in the 1970s was not just transportation, it was entertainment. On hot afternoons, kids hopped into the truck bed barefoot, bouncing against the metal floor as parents drove through town or down the highway. Teens piled in after football games, laughing and singing as the wind whipped through their hair. Adults did it too, heading home from construction sites or farm fields with a dozen people squeezed together. There were no seatbelts, no cushions, just the open air and a false sense of invincibility. Parents saw it as harmless fun, and most police officers looked the other way. The danger was real, though. One sharp turn or sudden stop could send people tumbling, yet the thrill always seemed worth it. Families brushed off close calls, telling stories about how everyone held on tight and made it home fine. Today, the thought of children flying down highways unrestrained feels terrifying, but at the time, it was as ordinary as riding a bike. People trusted the moment, trusted their luck, and trusted that nothing would happen. Looking back, it is hard to believe how normal this once was, but in the 1970s, it was just another part of everyday life. Family road trips in station wagons often looked more like rolling living rooms than safe travel. Kids sprawled across the cargo area in the back, lying on sleeping bags, reading comic books, or playing games while the cars sped along highways. Seatbelts were there, tucked between cushions, but they were rarely used. Parents thought of them as uncomfortable, even unnecessary, especially on long drives. Children sat sideways, faced backward, or even napped on the floor. The station wagon became a playground on wheels, where arguments over space turned into tickle fights and older siblings claimed window seats. Families believed comfort mattered more than safety, often bragging about how the kids could stretch out and sleep the whole ride. Nobody imagined what could happen in an accident, because for most, nothing bad had happened yet. Today, strapping children in is the law, and families cannot imagine driving a mile without buckling up. But in the 1970s, the freedom of an open back seat was seen as part of the adventure, a chance for kids to enjoy the journey as much as the destination. Looking back, it feels reckless, but for families then, it was just the way things were done. Drinking and driving in the 1970s was not the taboo it is today. It was surprisingly ordinary. Open containers sat in cup holders, or beer bottles were passed around on the way to concerts and ball games. Drivers casually sipped while steering, and nobody thought much of it. DUI laws existed, but they were far looser, and enforcement was rare. Getting caught often meant a small fine, maybe a warning, but not much else. People joked about one for the road, and bars even leaned into the culture with late-night specials. It was a time when drinking was considered social, not dangerous, and entire communities treated it as no big deal. Everyone knew someone who had driven home after too many drinks, and the stories were told more as adventures than cautionary tales. Today, the very thought is shocking, but in the 1970s, it was part of the fabric of nightlife. The risks were ignored, the laws were weak, and the expectation was that people would be careful and make it home. It took years of tragedies and stronger laws to change that mindset. Looking back, it is clear how reckless it was, but at the time, it was just another night out. In the 1970s, car trips often included kids standing proudly between the two front seats. They leaned on the armrest, gripped the dashboard, or even rested an elbow on the steering wheel, convinced they were helping to drive. Parents encouraged it, smiling at the excitement it gave their children. With few child safety laws, there were no booster seats, no harnesses, and no real sense of danger. Children perched on laps or squeezed between parents, peering out the windshield as the car rolled down highways. Photos from the era show grinning kids waving from the front, completely unrestrained, while parents looked on proudly. The sense of danger simply was not there, because nothing had happened yet to challenge the belief that it was safe. Today, we know better, but at the time it was considered one of the joys of childhood. Siblings argued over who got to ride up front or take a turn helping mom or dad steer. It felt grown up, it felt special, and it was completely ordinary. Looking back, it seems almost reckless, but in the 1970s, it was seen as one of the small privileges of family travel. In the 1970s, cigarettes were everywhere. People smoked in diners, department stores, even at their desks and offices. Ashtrays were part of every table setting, and lobbies held vending machines filled with cigarette packs. Restaurants had smoking and non-smoking sections, but the smoke drifted across both. Malls filled with clouds of cigarette haze as shoppers strolled with lit cigarettes in hand. At work, ashtrays piled with butts sat beside typewriters, and business meetings were conducted through a fog of smoke. Teenagers grew up breathing secondhand smoke at lunch counters and in waiting rooms, thinking little of it. The smell clung to clothes, hair, and furniture, so constant that people hardly noticed it anymore. Today, smoke-free laws make the thought unimaginable, but at the time it was as ordinary as drinking coffee. Cigarettes were symbols of sophistication, relaxation, or stress relief, and public spaces were built around accommodating them. Looking back, it feels suffocating, but for people living in the 1970s, it was simply part of the atmosphere of daily life. Riding bikes without helmets was the default for kids in the 1970s. They jumped on their bikes after school, tearing through neighborhoods, racing friends, and weaving through traffic. Helmets were rare, often dismissed as unnecessary or uncool. Scraped knees, elbows, and even the occasional broken arm were seen as badges of honor. Parents shouted reminders like, "Be home by dark," but rarely about safety gear. Entire groups of children rode together, swerving through intersections and performing tricks, all without a second thought. It was common to see kids ride double on one bike, balancing on handlebars or rear pegs with no fear at all. The clatter of playing cards and spokes made bicycles sound like motorcycles, adding to the thrill of reckless rides. Falling off was expected, but it only made you tougher in the eyes of your friends. Wearing a helmet would have made you stand out in the worst way. Nobody wanted to be the kid who looked different. Today, helmets are required by law in many places, but back then the risks were overlooked in favor of freedom. The sense of independence, the wind in your hair, and the thrill of riding fast outweighed any concern. Looking back, it seems careless, but for kids in the 1970s, it was simply the way childhood was meant to be lived. In the 1970s, car seats for children were almost laughably simple. Instead of the reinforced, crash-tested designs we know today, most seats were little more than padded booster cushions. They were designed not for safety, but to help kids see out the window. Parents believed this was enough, strapping children in loosely or not at all. Laws requiring proper child seats did not yet exist, so families improvised. Some kids sat on pillows or stacked phone books to feel taller. Some even stood on the seats during drives, leaning forward to talk to parents or point at things outside. When cars braked suddenly, children slid across vinyl benches, giggling as though it was part of the fun. The idea that a cushion could protect a child in a crash shows just how differently safety was understood. During sudden stops, children often slid around, bracing themselves against doors or gripping armrests for balance. The idea of a fully engineered child restraint system was years away, and convenience came first. Today, the thought is unsettling, but in the 1970s it was simply normal. Families trusted their instincts, and safety standards had not yet caught up. Looking back, it is startling to realize how unprotected kids really were in moving cars. The front seat was a coveted spot for kids in the 1970s. Parents often let children ride up front, even sitting them on laps during short trips. Airbags were not yet standard in cars, so no one thought about the dangers of their absence. The front seat symbolized maturity, a reward for good behavior or being the oldest sibling. Kids loved the view, loved the sense of being in charge, and parents rarely questioned it. Many kids even grabbed the steering wheel on empty roads, laughing while parents pretended to let them drive. Siblings fought bitterly for turns, sometimes calling shotgun days in advance to secure the seat. Riding in front felt like a promotion, a step closer to being an adult. Arguments broke out among siblings over who got to sit up front, and parents rotated turns to keep peace. What we now see as unsafe was once just a simple family ritual, a way to make car rides feel special. Today, strict laws and safety warnings forbid it, but in the 1970s, it was everyday life. Looking back, it feels like a gamble, but at the time it was a moment of pride and joy for kids everywhere. Malls in the 1970s were not just shopping centers, they were social playgrounds. Parents dropped their kids off and trusted them to roam for hours at a time. Groups of children crowded food courts, hung out at arcades, and flipped through records in music stores. There were no cell phones, no constant check-ins, just a set time and place to meet back up. Parents felt malls were safe, brightly lit, and always full of people. Teenagers treated them like miniature towns, spending entire afternoons without adult supervision. Many kids saw the mall as their first taste of freedom, learning how to budget allowance money and make decisions without parents. Arcades rang with the sound of quarters dropping into machines while kids formed crowds around the newest games. The mall became the center of weekend life, a hub for both shopping and socializing. Parents saw no harm, believing the community atmosphere protected their children. Today, the idea of leaving kids unsupervised in a public space seems reckless, but back then, it was viewed as harmless independence. Malls were where friendships formed, trends spread, and kids got their first real taste of freedom. Looking back, it is amazing how much trust parents placed in the world around them. In the 1970s, it was common for parents to leave their kids in the car while they ran errands. Children sat in back seats with toys, books, or the radio playing, waiting for what felt like forever. Windows were cracked open on hot days, but rarely enough. Parents assured themselves they would only be gone for a few minutes, and since everyone did it, it seemed normal. Kids remember staring at parking lots, counting cars, and watching strangers walk by, sometimes feeling nervous, but mostly just bored. Some kids even climbed into the front seat to honk the horn, startling their parents when they returned. Others played make-believe, pretending the parked car was a spaceship or a fort. Long waits could feel endless, but boredom was accepted as part of childhood. The dangers of heat and suffocation were not widely known, so parents saw it as a harmless choice. Today, leaving children in cars is considered a crime, but back then, it was just another parenting shortcut. Looking back, it is chilling to realize how easily things could have gone wrong, but in the 1970s, it was accepted without question. Hitchhiking in the 1970s was not seen as reckless. It was seen as practical. Strangers stuck out their thumbs on highways, back roads, and small-town streets, trusting that someone would stop and offer a ride. College students hitched to campuses, soldiers home on leave did it to save money, and teenagers used it as a cheap adventure. It was common to see young people standing by exit ramps with handwritten cardboard signs, smiling and waving as cars passed. And more often than not, those cars actually stopped. Drivers welcomed the company, swapping stories with strangers who might only ride a few miles. Parents sometimes even encouraged it, believing the world was safe enough for their kids to rely on strangers. Hitchhiking became a rite of passage, a symbol of independence and trust in others. Today, the idea sounds shocking, unimaginable even, given what we now know about the risks. But in the 1970s, there was little fear. People saw it as part of the era's free-spirited culture, when trust was high and danger seemed far away. Looking back, it is hard not to marvel at the innocence of it, even as the reality feels unsettling now. High-speed joyrides without seatbelt laws were an adrenaline rush for teens in the 1970s. Seatbelts existed, but there was no legal requirement to wear them, and most people ignored them anyway. Teenagers would pile into cars, crank up the radio, and hit the open roads at speeds that pushed the limits. Going 80 miles an hour down a country highway was more about freedom than fear. Windows rolled down, hair flying, everyone shouted along to the music as the world blurred past. Parents knew their kids sped around town, but the culture treated it as harmless rebellion, not danger. Gas was cheap, roads were wide open, and cars were built like tanks, giving teens a false sense of invincibility. Nights often ended with everyone bragging about speed instead of safety, turning risk into a kind of status symbol. Friends bragged about how fast they could go, and near misses became stories to laugh about the next day. Today, the thought of teenagers rocketing down roads without seatbelts is terrifying, but in the 1970s, it was almost a badge of honor. It symbolized growing up, pushing boundaries, and tasting independence. Looking back, it is easy to see the risks, but for teens at the time, it was just another joyride through the decade's wide-open roads. BB gunfights between kids were treated like casual play rather than dangerous behavior. Neighborhood kids ran through backyards and fields, pointing their plastic rifles and popping off pellets at each other. Parents saw it as pretend war, no different than throwing water balloons or playing tag. Boys came home with welts on their arms and legs, proudly showing them off as battle scars. The sting was part of the fun, and no one thought much about the damage ABB could really do. Kids dared each other to shoot from closer range, testing bravery in ways that made injuries almost guaranteed. Many returned home with bruises hidden under sleeves, quietly proud rather than worried about telling parents. Some kids even wore goggles or helmets, but most just trusted they would not get hit in the eye. Today, the idea of children shooting each other with BB guns sounds reckless and frightening. But in the 1970s, it was just another after-school pastime, encouraged by the cheapness of toy-like rifles sold in local stores. Looking back, it is remarkable how dangerous games were disguised as harmless play and how little adults worried about it. Fireworks like M80s were freely sold to kids in the 1970s, and they were powerful enough to cause serious harm. Small-town stands and corner stores stocked them right alongside sparklers and smoke bombs. Children could walk up with a few dollars and leave with explosives meant for professionals. Lighting them was both thrilling and terrifying, as kids tossed them in mailboxes, garbage cans, or backyards. The booms rattled windows, set off car alarms, and sometimes left scorched patches of grass. Parents shrugged, telling kids to be careful, but rarely stepping in. Stories of accidents circulated, blown off fingers, singed hair, or shattered glass. But instead of banning them, communities treated it as cautionary folklore. Kids swapped tips on how to make the blasts bigger, pushing boundaries further with each summer. Every neighborhood had at least one story of someone losing a finger, yet the tradition continued summer after summer. Today, the sale of such fireworks to children would be unthinkable, but back then, they were a symbol of freedom and fun. Looking back, it is astonishing how accessible they were, and how easily kids could buy explosives without anyone blinking an eye. Lawn darts, also known as jarts, were marketed as family fun, despite being heavy, sharp projectiles. The game was simple: toss the darts high into the air and try to land them in a target ring on the grass. In reality, the darts often missed their marks, embedding themselves in the ground, or worse. Children raced to retrieve them, sometimes crossing paths with a dart mid-air. Families laughed off near misses, treating it as part of the challenge. Many kids remember the dull thud of a dart hitting the ground inches from their feet, their parents chuckling nervously instead of panicking. Backyard barbecues often had jarts set up beside badminton nets and croquet, as though all three games carried the same level of risk. Hospital visits were brushed off as just bad luck, even when news reports highlighted serious injuries nationwide. Despite mounting warnings, stores continued to sell jarts as wholesome outdoor fun, reinforcing their image as a family classic. It was not unusual to see kids running barefoot across lawns while sharp-tipped darts rained down nearby. The darts were made of metal with pointed tips, capable of puncturing skin or even bone, but parents still set them up at backyard parties. Serious injuries happened, but warnings were ignored because the game was cheap and entertaining. Today, the very idea of selling sharp metal missiles as toys feels absurd, but in the 1970s, it was normal backyard fun. Looking back, It is shocking how casual people were about mixing danger with play. Playgrounds with asphalt or concrete surfaces were the norm. Children climbed metal monkey bars, swung high into the air, and jumped off slides onto unforgiving ground. There was no soft rubber padding, no mulch, no engineered safety surfacing. A fall meant skinned knees at best and broken bones at worst. Parents watched from park benches, chatting casually, as kids tested the limits of gravity. The clang of metal against asphalt was familiar, and kids learned early that pain was part of play. Teachers on recess duty kept bandages ready, knowing that bloodied elbows and chipped teeth were daily occurrences. The toughness earned on those playgrounds became a badge of pride, as those scars proved you were brave. Hot metal slides scorched bare legs in summer, and jungle gyms stood over hard pavement without a second thought. The motto was simple: if you fell, you learned not to do it again. Today's padded, carefully designed play structures feel worlds apart from the brutal surfaces of the past. But in the 1970s, asphalt playgrounds were where kids toughened up, and a trip to the emergency room was just another part of growing up. Corporal punishment in public schools was still legally permitted in the 1970s. Teachers kept wooden paddles or rulers in their desks, ready to discipline misbehaving students. Getting swats on the hand or a paddle across the backside was not unusual. It was expected. Parents often supported it, believing strict discipline built character. Children whispered about the scariest teachers, the ones whose punishments stung the most. Some classrooms even had paddles hung on the wall as a warning, their names carved or painted to make them seem more intimidating. Students dreaded the walk to the front of the room, where humiliation stung almost as much as the smack itself. For many kids, the memory of that sharp crack never faded, shaping how they remembered school discipline decades later. Students sat in silence as classmates were called to the front, enduring embarrassment along with the pain. The fear of punishment kept many kids in line, but it also left lasting marks, both physical and emotional. Today, such practices are banned in most places, but in the 1970s, corporal punishment was part of school culture. Looking back, it feels harsh, but at the time it was widely accepted as just another tool for education. Pregnant women drinking and smoking publicly was not only common, it was rarely questioned. Expectant mothers sipped cocktails at parties or lit up cigarettes in restaurants, seen as no different than anyone else. Doctors sometimes even reassured women that a little alcohol or tobacco caused no harm. Public health campaigns warning against it did not exist yet. Photos from the era show pregnant women holding martinis at social gatherings, proudly posing without fear of judgment. Cigarette ads featured glamorous mothers-to-be, smiling confidently while holding a pack, as though it symbolized sophistication. Family gatherings often included toasts, where pregnant women raised their glasses without hesitation, encouraged rather than discouraged. The lack of caution reflected a broader trust in authority, where few dared to question what doctors or advertisers claimed. Smoking ads even suggested it could help manage stress during pregnancy, reinforcing the idea that it was harmless. Today, the risks are well known, and the sight would cause outrage. But in the 1970s, it was accepted behavior, part of a time when medical advice was far less strict. Looking back, it is one of the most startling cultural differences, showing just how much knowledge has changed in only a few decades. Sunbathing with baby oil instead of sunscreen was a popular trend in the 1970s. People spread out blankets at the beach or lay by the pool, glistening in the sun. Instead of protecting skin, baby oil magnified the rays, intensifying tans and burns. A deep bronze glow was the ultimate summer accessory, proof of leisure and beauty. Sunscreen existed but was rarely used, seen more as something for children than adults. Women mixed baby oil with iodine for a darker sheen, while teenagers compared who could stay in the sun the longest without burning. Magazines praised the golden, sun-kissed look, ignoring the painful aftermath of blistered shoulders and peeling skin. The pursuit of the perfect tan was treated as worth any amount of discomfort. Women mixed baby oil with iodine for an even darker tan, while men boasted about how long they could stay in the sun. The painful sunburns that followed were shrugged off as part of the process, often treated with aloe or cold cloths. Today, with the knowledge of skin cancer and long-term damage, the practice seems reckless. But in the 1970s, bronzed skin was prized, and the risks were simply ignored. Looking back, it is astonishing how beauty trends once encouraged damage over protection. Open containers at sporting events and parks were tolerated almost everywhere. Fans carried beers into stadiums, parents sipped wine at picnics, and nobody raised an eyebrow. Drinking in public spaces was not just common, it was expected. Baseball games had stands overflowing with beer cups, and community parks were filled with coolers of alcohol during gatherings. Police often looked the other way, focusing only on fights or serious problems. Children ran past adults sipping openly, learning early that drinking was a normal part of social life. Families shared space with rowdy fans, but it was accepted as part of the atmosphere. Today, strict open container laws make public drinking rare outside of licensed areas. But in the 1970s, the culture was more relaxed, treating alcohol as just another part of the fun. Looking back, it is clear how much attitudes toward public drinking have tightened, reflecting a shift from carefree indulgence to controlled environments. No seatbelt use in taxis or buses was simply the way things were in the 1970s. When you climbed into a cab, you slid across the vinyl seat, maybe slammed the door, and that was it. You never even reached for a belt. Most passengers did not even know where they were tucked away, and drivers never reminded anyone to strap in. On buses, the idea was unthinkable. Kids rode school buses packed 3 to a seat, bouncing along rough roads with nothing holding them in place. Public buses were no different. People stood in the aisles, clinging to straps or poles, while the driver braked hard at every stop. Accidents happened, but injuries were brushed off as bad luck, not as evidence that something was missing. Seatbelts were seen as optional, almost an annoyance, and most people believed large vehicles were safe enough on their own. Today, buckling up is second nature, enforced by law and reinforced by decades of safety campaigns. But in the 1970s, the casual acceptance of riding unrestrained reflected a world less concerned with prevention and more focused on convenience. Looking back, it is startling to realize how little protection people had and how normal it all felt at the time. Candy cigarettes marketed directly to kids were one of the most shocking norms of the 1970s. Brightly colored boxes mimicked real cigarette brands, complete with logos, flip tops, and fake filters. Kids tore open the packs at recess, puffed on chalky white sticks, and blew out powdered sugar smoke. For children, it was pure fun, an imitation of the adult world. But for candy companies, it was clever marketing, normalizing smoking at an early age. Parents often bought them without thinking, treating them as harmless sweets. Playgrounds became filled with children striking poses, holding candy between their fingers, and pretending to inhale like grown-ups. For many, it was their first introduction to the rituals of smoking, long before they ever encountered a real cigarette. Today, the very idea feels outrageous, banned in many places for how directly it targeted kids. But in the 1970s, candy cigarettes were just another treat on store shelves, stacked right beside gum and lollipops. Looking back, it is impossible to ignore how they blurred the line between innocence and addiction, offering kids a sweet entry point into a dangerous adult habit. Gas station attendants pumping leaded gas was an everyday scene. Pulling up to a service station meant rolling down your window, asking for regular, and watching the attendant pump fuel into the tank. That regular was leaded gasoline, the default option nationwide. Signs advertised it proudly, and nobody thought about the long-term consequences. Attendants wiped windshields, checked oil, and leaned on cars, breathing in fumes all day long. Drivers did too, standing nearby while the thick smell of leaded exhaust clung to the air. Children rode in back seats with windows open, sucking in toxins as casually as fresh air. Entire neighborhoods reeked of it, especially near highways, but it was accepted as part of modern life. Today, leaded gasoline is recognized as one of the most harmful pollutants ever unleashed, but in the 1970s, it powered nearly every car in America. Looking back, it is shocking how something so dangerous could feel so normal, tied to the everyday act of filling your tank. Spraying DDT in yards for mosquito control was not just accepted, it was encouraged. Trucks rolled down suburban streets in summer, misting clouds of chemicals into the air. Children ran behind them, laughing and playing as the fog settled around them. Parents sprayed gardens, lawns, and even swing sets with cans of DDT, trusting the labels that promised safety. The smell lingered in the air, sharp and chemical, but nobody thought it harmful. Kids inhaled it, pets rolled in it, and vegetables were eaten right out of sprayed gardens. It was part of a broader culture of trust in science, where chemicals were seen as solutions, not threats. Today, DDT is infamous for its toxic legacy, banned after years of environmental damage and health concerns. But in the 1970s, it was part of suburban life, a tool to keep mosquitoes at bay. Looking back, it is unsettling to imagine children chasing the very chemicals that are now seen as dangerous poisons. But at the time, it was just another summer ritual. Asbestos, used in homes and schools, was one of the most dangerous normalcies of the 1970s. It lined pipes, insulated walls, and coated ceiling tiles, praised for its fireproofing and durability. Builders swore by it, and families trusted it, never realizing they were breathing in fibers that could scar lungs for life. Schools were filled with it, from boiler rooms to floor tiles, and kids sat in classrooms completely unaware. Renovations sometimes released clouds of asbestos dust, brushed off as harmless dirt. Teachers, janitors, and construction workers handled it daily, without masks or warnings, completely unaware of the risks. Parents celebrated it as a modern miracle material, proud their homes had the latest in safety. Today, asbestos is tightly regulated, recognized as a deadly carcinogen responsible for countless illnesses. But in the 1970s, it was everywhere, woven into the very fabric of everyday life. Looking back, it is haunting to realize how entire communities lived surrounded by invisible danger, trusting in a material that silently harmed them. Parents spanking kids in public did not invite whispers or legal warnings. It earned nods of approval. In the 1980s, discipline happened wherever it was needed. At the grocery store, in parking lots, outside churches, in schoolyards. If a child misbehaved, parents corrected them on the spot. A quick swat to the backside or a firm grip on the arm was considered loving firmness, not abuse. Older folks would even say, "That child will thank you one day." The phrase, "spare the rod, spoil the child," was not just quoted, it was lived. Nobody called the authorities. Teachers spanked students too. It was woven into the culture of consequences and correction. Today, that same act is considered public violence by many. It can lead to police reports, social worker visits, or even legal charges. And yet, for many who grew up back then, it was the way boundaries were taught. A smack on the bottom followed by a stern look was how parents said, "I love you enough to correct you." Right or wrong, it was real. But for a generation that was spanked in the cereal aisle, there was another truth. Most of them never buckled up in the car ride home. Mall food court hangouts were not about the food, they were about freedom. Teenagers in the 1980s treated the mall like their second home, wandering its air-conditioned halls with nothing but pocket change and big plans to do absolutely nothing. The food court was the epicenter. Tables filled with cliques, couples, and groups of giggling friends stretched out time between slices of greasy pizza and soft pretzels. One soda could last hours, especially when refills were free. You scoped out crushes, eavesdropped on drama, and occasionally made eye contact with someone cool enough to nod back. Parents dropped you off and picked you up hours later, trusting the mall to act like a babysitter with bright lights and security guards. Whether you sat near the arcade or tucked into the corner by Orange Julius, the food court was a social stage. It was loud, it was messy, and it felt like your world. Every weekend brought the same faces, the same greasy trays, and the same comforting rhythm of adolescent independence. No one talked about it like it was special, but for those who grew up there, it was the perfect mix of noise, neon, and growing up in public. Generic brand groceries were the quiet label of struggle in the 1980s. Walk into any store and you would see those plain white boxes with nothing but bold black lettering, cornflakes, macaroni, or just soup. No mascots, no cartoons, no sparkle. They sat on the bottom shelf like they were trying not to be noticed. But they were. Everyone saw them. Kids knew what they meant. If those showed up in your cart, you were not getting prizes in your cereal. You were just getting food. Some tasted okay. Some tasted like cardboard. But they filled the pantry. And that was the point. They were cheaper by quarters that mattered. Some families would peel off the labels just so the box did not scream. Others embraced them, one no-name can at a time. In school lunches, you hoped no one saw the off-brand cookies. You ate them fast, hoping they passed for the real thing. Generic brand groceries were not glamorous. They were not meant to be. But they were the invisible badge of getting by. And for the families that counted every dollar, those blank white labels were a quiet promise. You were doing what you could, and you were not alone. Making a mixtape in the 1980s was not just about the music. It was about what the music meant. This was not a playlist you could throw together in 5 minutes. This was a curated collection of feelings, carefully selected for maximum emotional impact. Every track had a purpose. Every order was intentional. You did not just make mixtapes for yourself. You made them for friends, for crushes, for breakups, for birthdays, for sitting in your room, staring at the ceiling, thinking deep thoughts you had no business thinking at that age. You would spend hours hitting pause and record, rewinding to check the transition, trying to fit exactly the right number of songs on each side without cutting one off too soon. There was a science to it, a rhythm, a philosophy. And then came the cover art. Doodles, stickers, fake band logos, scribbled lyrics, little hearts and broken hearts. The label on a mixtape said everything about who you were or who you wanted to be. These tapes were gifts, time capsules, emotional resumes. You gave one to someone and it meant something. It meant a lot. But if you did not have the patience or just wanted to cheat the system a little, you could always get a dozen albums for the price of a gumball. Almost. You would toss it in and forget about it. That was the beauty of the laundry chute. A small hatch built right into the hallway wall or bathroom cabinet, leading straight down into a hamper, or sometimes directly into the basement laundry room. Just open, drop, and go. These vertical passageways were like magic portals for dirty socks and sweaty gym clothes. No more lugging baskets down 2 flights. No more arguments about whose turn it was. You just lifted the flap and let gravity do the work. Kids treated them like secret tunnels. Parents treated them like a godsend. But like many good things, laundry chutes eventually went out of style. Safety concerns popped up, especially with young kids and pets. And then there was the fire risk, as an open shaft could let smoke and flames move between floors. Add in the rise of compact laundry machines on upper levels, and suddenly the chute became obsolete. But admit it, there is still something satisfying about the idea of chucking a shirt through the wall. And speaking of walls, wait until you hear about the windows that were not exactly windows. Buying beer for Dad at the corner store was the kind of errand that made every kid feel grown up. Mom would scribble a note, something like, "Please sell Johnny a 6-pack for his father." And the cashier accepted it without hesitation. Imagine a child barely tall enough to see over the counter, lugging glass bottles of beer back home like it was a loaf of bread. Some kids tucked the note into their pocket like a secret code, grinning when the cashier didn't even bother reading it. Others puffed out their chest proudly, feeling like little adults trusted with a big job. Sometimes, if the kid was a regular, the clerk didn't even ask for a note, just handed over the beer and maybe a pack of smokes for good measure. Carrying those heavy bottles made you feel strong, even if they clinked dangerously in the bag. Marching home with Dad's 6-pack felt like a mission accomplished. Sometimes the clerk even tossed in a pack of smokes, no questions asked. Kids beamed with pride walking out the door, not realizing they were basically participating in an undercover crime ring. Parents saw it as convenience. The law today would see it as contributing to the delinquency of a minor. Still, for a kid in the 70s, that corner store run was a rite of passage. Clackers were two acrylic or glass balls tied to a string and handed to children with no safety warnings and a full green light. You'd hold the middle of the string, swing the balls upward and downward until they collided above and below your hand, producing that iconic clack-clack sound. It looked simple. It sounded addictive. It was also a hazard waiting to happen. The plastic versions could chip. The glass ones could shatter. And if you missed your rhythm, one ball went rogue, swinging at eyebrow height with all the grace of a wrecking ball. Kids practiced for hours, trying to get the timing right, turning every playground into a percussion concert of risk. Parents shrugged. Teachers banned them. Hospitals stocked up on ice packs and gauze. But still, they were cool. Until one clack too many ended in sharp pieces flying through the air. Eventually, safety commissions pulled them off shelves. But back then, one broken pair just meant you were in the market for another. And if that seemed dangerous, wait till you hear about people putting flammable foam containers directly onto gas stoves like it was just another Tuesday. Let us talk about the rumpus room. If the living room was where adults behaved themselves, the rumpus room was where the kids got wild. Usually tucked away in the basement, this was the unofficial playground of every suburban household from the 1950s to the 1970s. Carpeted in wall-to-wall shag, lit by lava lamps, and often filled with beanbag chairs, dartboards, and mismatched furniture, the rumpus room was every child's dream and every parent's secret weapon. You could send the kids down there for hours, let them roughhouse, make noise, and burn off all that energy while the grown-ups enjoyed some blessed peace upstairs. It was not about looking nice, it was about cutting loose. Some had jukeboxes, others had board games stacked to the ceiling, and every now and then, you would find a couch that doubled as a trampoline. It was chaos, but it was controlled chaos. Over time, the idea faded as homes got bigger and open concepts took over. Now, everything is multifunctional. But there was something beautiful about a room that existed just for noise, mess, and memory-making. The name says it all, rumpus. No rules, just vibes. But even in the loudest house, you still needed a way to call the kids upstairs. And you will not believe how we used to do that. Aquanet's scented hairspray line hit the shelves in 1968, hoping to combine the hold of a hair helmet with the charm of a perfume ad. The brand was already a household name. By then, Aquanet had glued more bouffants in place than any other product on the market. But someone in marketing must have thought, you know what this cloud of chemicals needs? Flowers. So they rolled out a special line of floral-scented versions. There were rose, jasmine, even a spring breeze blend. The idea was to give users a refreshing, elegant aroma while locking their hairstyle in place for hours. But it backfired, fast. The floral notes clashed with every other scent in a person's routine. The smells mixed into something that made elevators unbearable. To make matters worse, the scent faded quickly, leaving behind the signature Aquanet chemical musk, just with a weird dying flower twist. Even die-hard Aquanet fans could not justify it. By the early 1970s, the line quietly disappeared from shelves. Aquanet stuck around, but its foray into fragrance was a short and smelly detour. But if you want a true example of how the 1960s misunderstood its audience, just look at the British bike that tried to win over American teens by shrinking everything they loved. Riding bikes without helmets was not considered dangerous. It was considered growing up. Children in the 1980s owned scraped knees, stubbed toes, and chipped teeth like badges of honor. You grabbed your bike and took off the moment the sun came up, racing friends through alleys, sidewalks, and backyards. The wind whipped your face. The world blurred past. Helmets were rare. If anyone had one, it was likely for motocross or medical reasons. Most parents did not even think to suggest it. Bike safety was taught through scraped elbows, not pamphlets. You rode with your shoelaces untied, your backpack swinging, maybe even one hand holding a soda. Some bikes had pegs, others had banana seats, but almost none had helmets. Today, many states have helmet laws, especially for children under 18. Schools give lessons, parents buy reflective gear. But for that earlier generation, The only thing protecting your head was your luck and your reflexes. It was risky, yes, but also exhilarating. And while today's parents would call that neglect, the freedom to take risks was part of what made childhood feel so vast. Just like thumbing a ride down the highway felt like part of growing up for teenagers and travelers alike. Neon everything was not a trend. It was a takeover. Shirts, socks, shoelaces, scrunchies. If it could be worn, it could be neon. Bright pinks, electric greens, yellows so vivid they could stop traffic. Walk into a classroom in the 1980s, and you might see a dozen students glowing like highlighters. It was not subtle, it was not sophisticated, but it was unforgettable. Neon made sure you were seen from across the street, or the roller rink. Entire outfits were built around one blinding shade. And the braver kids, they mixed them. A neon blue shirt with neon orange shorts and lime green shoelaces. Why not? Matching was optional. Visibility was everything. Neon told the world you were loud, proud, and unbothered by what anyone else thought. It showed up in birthday parties, aerobics tapes, and mall photo booths. Looking back now, it seems like a color explosion. But that was the magic. Neon was confidence in color form. It was youth, amplified. It was chaos, celebrated. And for those who wore it without a hint of irony, it was the brightest part of a decade that refused to dim. Limited extracurricular activities were just another way the world reminded you what you could not afford. Other kids had piano lessons, karate classes, and sports teams with matching uniforms. You had afternoons at home watching TV or playing outside with a stick and a rock. Sign-up fees were too high, equipment cost too much. Even the rides to practice were out of reach if the car was needed for work. You brought home the flyers from school and left them on the table, hoping. Sometimes they just disappeared. Sometimes your parents gently explained that maybe next time meant probably never. You cheered from the sidelines, you watched from the crowd, and you learned how to clap with a smile even when your heart wanted in. It was not fair, it stung, but you found other ways to grow. You read library books, you drew comics in the margins of your notebook, you played tag until the sun went down, and maybe you missed out on trophies and tournaments, but you learned resilience, creativity, and how to find joy in the quiet spaces. You might not have worn the jersey, but you still showed up, and that mattered. MTV in the 1980s was not just a channel, it was a movement. The second you heard that iconic, "I want my MTV," you knew you were about to step into another world. A world where music lived on your screen, not just your speakers. Where your favorite artist could become a visual legend. It played music videos, actual music videos, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That meant you could go from watching Cyndi Lauper dancing through city streets to seeing Michael Jackson turn into a werewolf without ever leaving your couch. Music became cinematic. Performances became stories. Seeing someone on TV who made you feel like you were not the only weirdo out there. And maybe, just maybe, being a weirdo was cool. MTV introduced you to bands you never heard of, genres you never explored, and visuals that burned into your brain like neon on wet pavement. You would tape videos, argue over countdowns, and swear that your favorite video was art. But when you got back to school, it was back to basics, and one look at your folder would say everything your mouth could not. Speaking of things built right into the house, you are not going to believe what kind of doors were hiding inside the walls. For your milk. Picture this. You wake up, walk to the side of your kitchen, and open a tiny little door built right into your house. Behind it, a bottle of fresh milk, cool and ready to pour, maybe even some butter or cream depending on the day. No, it is not magic. That was the milk door, also called a milk chute. These small pass-through compartments were genius in their simplicity. One side opened from the outside, where the milkman would quietly place the day's delivery. The other opened from inside the house, so you never had to go out in your slippers or bathrobe. It was the drive-through window before there were drive-thrus. These doors were more than convenient. They were a sign that the world once ran on a shared rhythm. Everyone knew when the milkman came by. You could even leave payments or notes inside. Some had little shelves, others had insulation. And most people never locked them because who would steal milk? Of course, once grocery stores and home refrigeration became widespread, the milk door quietly disappeared, sealed up, painted over, or just forgotten. But somewhere out there, behind layers of drywall, a few still exist. Hidden time capsules. Smoking in the grocery store is one of those things that sounds absurd now but raised zero eyebrows in the 70s. Parents pushed carts down the aisles with a cigarette dangling from their lips, ash balancing dangerously as they grabbed a box of cereal. The produce section smelled like lettuce mixed with secondhand smoke, and nobody flinched. Some parents even handed the cigarette to a child to hold it while they bagged apples. Ashtrays were bolted to the ends of shopping carts so you could puff and push at the same time. Clerks lit up while stocking soup cans, leaving little trails of ash on the linoleum floors. Every aisle had a faint haze, blending with the cold mist spraying over vegetables. Shopping was less about fresh air and more about breathing in a smoky haze of community life. Sometimes ash even flicked onto packages of bread or stacked apples, brushed off like it was nothing. Store clerks smoked while stocking shelves, casually exhaling into the frozen food section. To modern eyes, it is a nightmare. But back then, it was everyday normal. A trip to buy milk and eggs also came with a free cloud of smoke, courtesy of every adult in the store. Spray-on snow was a holiday must-have in the 1960s, a seasonal delight that turned every window into a frosted wonderland. Just shake the can, press the nozzle, and watch as fluffy white patterns appeared across the glass. It was festive, easy to use, and absolutely everywhere. The catch? That soft, pretty snow was often laced with lead-based pigment. Yep, neurotoxins right in the living room. Kids would draw smiley faces and snowflakes, breathing in fumes and getting it on their fingers before heading back to sip cocoa. Parents sprayed entire windows from top to bottom, unaware that every jolly doodle came with a microscopic health warning. When the holidays were over, wiping it off meant smearing fine white dust all over the furniture, and sometimes even using dry cloths that kicked it up into the air again. It stuck to glass, to hands, and to memories. Photos from the era show smiling kids standing in front of the stuff, glowing with seasonal pride and unknowingly inhaling trace amounts of heavy metals. Eventually, safer versions appeared on the market. But for a while, decorating windows was more toxic than tinsel. And if the snow spray didn't get you, the bed you fell asleep on might, because some kids literally snoozed on pillows filled with flammable fluff. Speaking of things built right into the house, you are not going to believe what kind of doors were hiding inside the walls. For your milk. Picture this. You wake up, walk to the side of your kitchen, and open a tiny little door built right into your house. Behind it, a bottle of fresh milk, cool and ready to pour, maybe even some butter or cream depending on the day. No, it is not magic. That was the milk door, also called a milk chute. These small pass-through compartments were genius in their simplicity. One side opened from the outside, where the milkman would quietly place the day's delivery. The other opened from inside the house, so you never had to go out in your slippers or bathrobe. It was the drive-through window before there were drive-thrus. These doors were more than convenient. They were a sign that the world once ran on a shared rhythm. Everyone knew when the milkman came by. You could even leave payments or notes inside. Some had little shelves, others had insulation. And most people never locked them because who would steal milk? Of course, once grocery stores and home refrigeration became widespread, the milk door quietly disappeared, sealed up, painted over, or just forgotten. But somewhere out there, behind layers of drywall, a few still exist. Hidden time capsules. Muscle pants for kids, that was the pitch. Somewhere, a grown-up looked at a child and said, "You know what this kid needs? Pants that scream steroid energy." These were Zubaz-style leggings with wild patterns and stretch material designed to mimic the bodybuilding look of adult gym rats. Except they were made for children. The problem was not just the patterns, which, by the way, included everything from neon zebra stripes to camouflage lightning bolts. It was that kids had no idea how to wear them. The pants were often too tight or too loose, and they came with this weird fake athletic vibe that clashed hard with the Sesame Street lunchboxes. These pants were a hard no. Schools started quietly banning them for being distracting, and parents got tired of explaining to teachers that no, their child was not training for a junior weightlifting championship. They were just victims of 1980s fashion. The trend came and went faster than you could say bicep curl. But speaking of trying too hard to look futuristic, let us talk about the time Atari thought your forehead could play video games. Driving after a few beers was seen as a minor risk, not a moral failing. In the 1980s, drinking and driving was common, so common it barely raised an eyebrow. Someone would leave a barbecue or a bowling alley, buzzed but smiling, and climb behind the wheel like it was just another Tuesday night. Sometimes they even brought a drink with them for the road, nestled between their legs or sitting in the cup holder before cup holders even existed. You might remember the clink of bottles under the seat or the faint scent of beer still on your uncle's breath as he drove you home. Nobody called it reckless, nobody flinched. It was treated the same way as driving tired or driving in the rain. Risky, sure, but manageable if you knew what you were doing. Breathalyzers were rare. Police might give a warning, not a ticket. Getting pulled over meant a brief conversation, not a night in jail. Today, of course, the laws have changed, and for good reason. Drunk driving kills thousands. Campaigns like Mothers Against Drunk Driving helped turn the tide, showing the public what casual drinking behind the wheel really cost. But back then, it was not about recklessness. It was about a culture that had not yet connected its habits with their consequences. And if the idea of casual drinking while driving sounds dangerous now, just imagine what the air was like inside your favorite restaurant. Television Guide was the original streaming schedule, printed, folded, and worshipped. Each week, families flipped through its pages to plan their entire viewing life. What time is your show on? What channel is the big movie airing? Without a television guide, you were lost in the static. It listed every program, from early morning cartoons to late-night reruns. You circled shows in pen. You memorized time slots. You argued with siblings over what to watch and when. Sometimes you even set a timer on the VCR to record your favorites, if you could figure out how. Television Guide came with featured articles, behind-the-scenes trivia, and occasionally a glossy cover that made you feel like you were holding something special. It was not just a magazine, it was a map, a lifeline, and a reminder that missing your show meant waiting until summer reruns or, gasp, never seeing it again. Kids today will never understand the pressure of being ready at exactly 7 o'clock, or the heartbreak of flipping the page and realizing your favorite show was preempted by a holiday parade. The television guide was small, simple, and essential, and in a world before scrolling, it helped us find our way through the glow of the living room screen. Back before virtual reality, ViewMaster Reels were the closest thing to teleportation we had. A small red plastic viewer, chunky and indestructible, that you held up to your face like some kind of sci-fi binoculars. But inside, whole worlds waited. You'd flick the lever with your thumb and instantly jump from a still frame of Mount Rushmore to a three-dimensional jungle scene with elephants that felt like they could walk right out of the frame. Some reels were cartoons, others were travel photos, some were straight-up educational, which somehow made you like them even more. They were quiet, simple, and personal. You did not share your ViewMaster. That was yours. A private little universe. Every kid had their favorite reel. Maybe it was the one with dinosaurs. Maybe it was the space shuttle. Whatever it was your escape hatch from a math worksheet or a rainy Saturday. The 1980s weren't about flashy screens or downloads. They were about plastic, paper, light, and wonder. And somehow, that was enough. Actually, it was more than enough. But if you really wanted to feel like you were holding the future in your hands, you did not stop at a ViewMaster. You went for the gadget that talked back. Seatbelt-free joyrides in station wagons were standard practice. Families piled in, kids sprawled across the massive back seat, older siblings camped out in the rear-facing seat, and toddlers bouncing freely on vinyl cushions. Nobody clicked in because most cars did not even have working belts, or if they did, nobody used them. The rear-facing seat became a theater box, where kids made faces at the drivers behind them. Brothers wrestled in the back, sisters sprawled out reading comic books, and somebody was always lying sideways across the whole bench. Food and toys rolled around the floor with every sharp turn, and no one cared if juice spilled because it would dry up by morning. A sudden brake slammed everyone forward into the front seat, which was just shrugged off with laughter. The chaos of movement was simply part of the fun. Brakes slammed, and everyone flew forward like bowling pins, only to laugh it off. Road trips became rolling playgrounds where snacks were tossed like footballs and naps happened across laps. It was chaos, it was unsafe, and somehow everyone survived. Today, police would be handing out tickets by the stack, but in the 1970s, it was just called family time. Looking back at how normal these shocking things once were, share in the comments which memory surprised you most.